The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
When did you come on to the story that by the way, maybe even a better question to ask you, as personal belief, do you believe the story, the quote official Barack Obama story told in books like Dreams from My Father, his speeches, the lionizing newspaper stories and books that are written, do you believe that story is straight?
No, I don't. I have to be, clear here. I'm not. I didn't attend Jay school. I don't consider myself to be an investigative journalist.
Yeah,
I'm a broadcaster. Yeah. I provide a platform for other people to speak. However, so I do, and I'm always open about my opinion. I don't believe the official story. I rarely believe the official version of events we get from the mainstream press. There's always an agenda. There's always something else, some subtext there that we're not getting. So it's no different with the Obama story. This is an exercise in Hollywood myth-making.
Thank you. If you're just joining us, this is a remarkable man, Richard Sterrett. I've watched it. It's up on our website, 710knus.com. And it's video. It's Vision TV in Canada. This is the host. Obama's forged birth certificate scandal and America's media shamed. Richard, why do you think, other than idiot radio shows like this one, why do you think seriously, why do you think no one wants a bite at the apple? No one wants to take this on?
In many cases, it's the equivalent of kissing the third rail. I think I call it the fur-lined trap. If you're a working journalist, let's say you're working in the White House, you're a White House press reporter, and you have to have your credentials approved by the Secret Service. Yeah. You've got a good paying gig. You may send your son or daughter to a private school. You've got a nice car. You've got a nice house. Maybe you live across the river in Virginia. And all of a sudden, you're gonna give that up. You're gonna put up your hand and ask a potentially damaging, embarrassing question. You'll get to ask one, and then never again. And then you're of no use to your employer, so you're done. That's the fur-lined trap. Nobody has to tell you. It's never so overt as to say, "Do not ask this question. Don't go there." You know where your bread is buttered.
What do you think the story really is, given the work that you've done?
Well, let me first issue this a caveat, if you will, in anticipation of people maybe labeling me as a racist. I am in love with the notion that the United States could elect a black president. I think it's fabulous. If I was an African American and I had a black son or daughter, I would be over the moon. So regardless of all this other nonsense, the idea that a black person can be elected president, I think, is wonderful. But here we have someone who we know less about this person than we do any president that's ever been elected.
We know more about James Buchanan than we know about Barack Obama.
That's right. He doesn't have the security clearance to be elected dog catcher. I mean, he wouldn't qualify to be a member of his own administration.
He could not pass E-Verify.
Yes, could he get a driver's license?
Could
he get a driver's license in the District of Columbia? I don't know.
True. I don't know if you believe this. His SSN, his Social Security number, belongs to a guy who's dead who lived in Connecticut.
Yeah, I think there's something like 25 different names attached to some of these.
Well, he's changed numbers. He's changed numbers. His draft registration number. I think he played a game that he was a foreign national. He's used that. I mean, there's too many people that know the story. In fact, his publisher had a biography that he wrote that talked about him being born in Kenya. I think he's foisted himself over as different people throughout his life. And when he was a little guy, he's not responsible. But when he turns 18 years of age and he shows up at Occidental College, he's now responsible for what he says. And the arrival at Columbia University, which I think is another one of those seminal moments, I believe, to come out of a 2 years, he comes out of Occidental, which is a kind of a party school on the West Coast. And he arrives at a prestigious Ivy League school. And I've talked to people who went to Ivy League schools. The Ivy League schools want to spit on me, but how to arrive. You go to a 2-year party school and then arrive at an Ivy League school. with 2 years under your belt in another school as a C student at best.
And nobody remembers you.
And why did they let him in?
Exactly. There's that. But nobody seems to remember him from Columbia.
Well, but does he tell them he allegedly rooms with these Pakistani guys? Does he tell them that he's Indonesian American? Does he tell them he's Muslim American? Does he tell them he's Muslim Indonesian? What passport? The whole passport lockdown. You don't see this man's passport. You can't. Who did he say he was, and what passport did he travel under? And then I remember Jerry Corsi's great work where he comes up with even another name called Surabaka.
Yes,
and
yes.
People thought he was crazy, and then he shows the documents that that's a name that he travels under.
Well, and then we go back to 2008 and the breach where his passport records were examined illegally, not once, not twice, but on three separate occasions.
I agree.
And John Brennan has been sort of attached to that breach as well.
Mm-hmm.
What were they doing in there? Were they expunging certain elements of those the passport records? I happen to think so.
Yeah, and I think this selective service card, I think he's run this foreign national scam so long that when he gets into Chicago, and why would he go to Chicago? He has no roots in Chicago in the mainstream story, other than I think his real father, Frank Marshall Davis. I think his connections in these. It just happens to be people who all come out of Chicago. But his credibility is in New York City. He lives in New York. He lives in California. He lives in Hawaii. He lives in Indonesia. Out of all the places in the world, he chooses Chicago. That's bizarre in and of itself.
Yeah, the whole narrative is kind of a patchwork. It's very choppy and inconsistent, like someone has sort of cut and pasted it together, not unlike his long-form birth certificate, in a very hasty manner.
And when he gets there, then they realize they want to get him into office and run him, and they thought anybody that does any checks on what historians call your bona fides, well, he's never registered for the draft, so they make up a draft number, because all this other time he's told everybody, same thing with the Social Security. I believe I know from my reading, there's a set-aside series of numbers for foreign nationals. Social Security numbers for foreign nationals, not for U.S. nationals. I think he flew with the Social Security number that was legitimately gotten when he was working at Baskin-Robbins as a kid, assigned to a foreign national. By the time he gets to Chi-Town, he's going to do what he's going to do. They got to get him or they get him one out of Hawaii. I don't know what role his mother or his grandmother played in all of this, but clearly that's not his number. He doesn't. And I remember when Bill O'Reilly told somebody lies that his father got it for him when his father went to Harvard. He got a Connecticut. And I said, everybody said, Bill, Harvard's in Massachusetts.
Right.
And then O'Reilly O'Reilly clearly lied so many times. But then when you look at it, who gets access on Super Bowl Sunday to an exclusive interview with the president? Bill O'Reilly.
From an investigative point of view here, and if this ever gets to Congress, a congressional hearing, and I know that's Sheriff Arpaio's goal, I can't see that happening. But I mean, if it ever gets there, where do they begin with this story?
No, you don't.
They've just got to hone in on one thing, and I think what they have to do is they have to start with the long-form birth certificate.
I agree.
Look at the 207 points of evidence that were submitted to the Alabama Supreme Court. Let's just start with that. Because as Mike Zullo has pointed out, Sheriff Arpaio's chief investigator, the whole Social Security number issue is just beyond their capability at this point. I don't understand why. It would seem to me that would be something fairly easy to check, but apparently it's very involved, very time-consuming. So they've got to start with the birth certificate.
I agree.
Those 207 points. And when you have a forensic document investigator who worked for the very same law firm representing Obama and comes out and says this is 1,000% a forgery.
Sure, it's a forgery.
How do you possibly ignore that?
You can't.
No, you can't. But somehow the mainstream.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.